Hey there guys, welcome back for another Mortal Realms Monday painting video. This week, doing something a little bit different, as you can see from the title of the video, and that is that we are doing the Orruk War Boss from the Premium Kit 3 that for most of us came out last month. I'm just a little bit behind on doing the video for him, or you know, on that kit, but obviously this week's Mortal Realms magazine, the issue that review that I've done for this week, didn't come with any models, it only came with paint, so I thought this would be a good point to do a sort of double up issue. So we got the a look through the Orruk magazine, the this week's issue, as well as this painting video on the War Boss. Obviously on top of that, I'm also trying out a new thing with the video here. You've obviously got a palette cam up in the top corner. The quality on this, it's not great at the minute. This is using an iPhone and the IV Cam app to, you know, see how that works out until I can get a better webcam for my main camera. Obviously some of the settings are a little bit off, hence why I've got quite pinkish fingers, but I've tried to play around with the colour to get the paints to look as close to, you know, what they really look like as possible. So without further ado, let's get on with this video. So as you can see, I've gone ahead and primed him in grey primer, and I'm now applying Loren Forest to all of the orc skin areas. So obviously that's his hands, his upper arms and his face. Obviously I'll give this a couple of coats. You'll notice I'm doing the nails as well, but I do actually change the fingernails a little bit later on in the video. But for now I'm just getting that green coat over all of those flesh areas, and like I say, a couple of coats of this and we can move on to the next step, which is where I will catch you guys in just a flash. Okay, and next up is to add some shading to the recesses of our green skin. So for this I'm using some Athonian Camo Shade and giving this a good wash over all of the green areas. Obviously try not to let it pool up in areas such as the eyes and that, but you know, in those deep muscle crevices and you know, between the fingers and things like that, we do want a little bit of pooling in there, just so we get a nice dark tone down in those shadow areas. Once that's all applied, obviously give that about 15 minutes to dry, and then we can start with highlighting these the skin. Okay, so going back now over the more raised areas of the skin, again with the Loren Forest. Obviously thin down a little bit, we don't want it applying too thick, and keeping away from those deeper areas where that shade you know, settled into. So mainly, you know, this is sort of tops of the hands, the, you know, knuckles, those large bulgy areas on the arms, top of his head, along the ridge of his ears, sort of the hump of his back that's just under his armour, you know, the top of his neck there, anywhere like that. Obviously just going in and getting a level of mid-tone back in there. Okay, next up some Deathguard Green, and obviously again thin down slightly. This is going to be my first highlight. This is going to be along any of those, again, those really raised areas, edges of knuckles, the sort of the very top line of the ears, bridge of the nose, eyebrows, the more bulgy parts of muscles, as well as those couple of thick veins that he has bulging out on those muscles of his. But yeah, this is, like I say, the first layer of highlight. Obviously with green skins you can go various ways with it. You can go dark and go with dark greens, more to what Black Orcs would be, or you could go quite pale and, you know, go with a real pale green. This one I would say is somewhere between the two, but maybe leaning a little bit more towards the paler side by the time we're finished. Obviously, if you want to do a darker skinned orc, then just step the colours up. Now, I would offer to do some videos on green skins, but I'm not actually keeping this premium kit. My son, his favourite colours are yellow, black and green, and as you can see from the screenshot for the video, that's the colour this orc is going to be. So I've painted this one up for you guys, and then I decided to let my son have the remainder of the box. So he's got the shaman and the 5 brutes, and he's going to have some fun painting those up. But I thought I would nick this one first and show you guys at least something from the premium kit. Anyway, I'll get on with doing these highlights, and we'll come back in just a bit. Okay, and for the final highlights, this is just on the sort of the very tips of certain areas, cheekbones, or, you know, that bit of skin that he has that wrinkles up when he does his snarl, eyebrows, or the you know, the ridge area, right along the edge of the fingers, knuckles and things like that. But we're taking some Ogryn camo, and obviously that's the highlight for the green skin. So the 3 colours, obviously the Loren Forest, shade that with the Athonian camo shade, go back over the most of the areas with the Loren Forest, add some first highlights with the Death Guard green, and then finish off with some very fine highlights of the Ogryn camo. And then with that, the skin will be done. So I'll get on with this bit, and we'll come back for the next step. Catch you guys in a bit. So moving on to the armour now, I'm taking some Iriel Yellow, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and applying this to all of, obviously, the areas that I want yellow. Now, I didn't want to go yellow all over this. What I wanted was essentially his main armour to be yellow, and then any extra bits that sort of have been bolted on, I wanted those in black. So things like the 2 shoulder guards, the his large jaw, the spiky bits on his left gauntlet, and some of the bits on his chest, as well as the bits on his boots and the sides of his legs, and I believe also his knee guard on his right knee, so the knee that's nearest the axe. Those would all be black, and then everything else yellow. Now obviously Iriel Yellow, not the nicest paint to work with. I found that this took me about 6 coats of paint. Now obviously I'm using it a little bit thinned. It may have gone on better over white paint, but on this grey it did take a while to get rid of that sort of that grey patchiness to show that was showing through. So be prepared, guys. Obviously, depending on what your Iriel Yellow and your primer is like, it may be a little bit easier, but for me, I think this is what put me off of wanting to paint any more orcs. Yellow for me is just not a nice paint to try and get a good coat on within a couple of layers. Most paints you could do it in 2, maybe 3 layers, but this one taking 5 or 6 was just a bit too much. But as you'll see from the end result, pushing through and persevering with it, you know, really came up top. So I'll get on with this, applying all this yellow, obviously being careful not to get it on those green areas, and then we'll come back in a bit. Okay, so now that I've got a good solid coat of yellow over the areas that I want obviously to be yellow, I'm now making up a shade. With this I'm using the Reikland Flesh shade, and there's about 4 brushfuls that have gone into that. Reikland Flesh shade, it has a little bit of a reddish tone but not as much as the gloss, so I'm putting in a couple of drops of Carroburg Crimson just to put it a little bit more towards the red side. Obviously Carroburg Crimson is a bit more, it's not quite a red, it's a little bit more towards the purpley side, so I don't want to put too much in there. And then a drop of Trollslayer Orange just to tone down that purplish red and bring it a little bit lighter and a little bit more towards that sort of yellowish side. Into that I'm putting 5 drops of Lahmian Medium. Now obviously I'm doing this all in one of them well palettes or whatever they're called, the dimple palettes. And this obviously has made it now a very sort of a rusty brown, rusty orangey brown, which works great on this yellow. I'm glad I recorded it, because if I hadn't I would probably never remember the quantities of this again, and it is a nice mix for use on yellow armour, so it's one that I'll be keeping in mind for future models and future projects. But all I'm going to do now is obviously apply this over all of the yellow areas, making sure that it gets into those recesses and sits within the panel joins, you know, the armour lines and things like that. But it does sort of stain the surface as well, so I do want to make sure that it goes nice and clean over all of the armour plating itself. So I try to obviously get a nice smooth stain over that, almost like I'm trying to glaze it, and then letting it concentrate a little bit more in recesses and such. And obviously you can see here I'm doing it around the studs on the sort of the groin panel there, but then obviously I decide, no, let's just go over the whole thing and get it nice and solid over the lot, and just concentrate it a little bit more within recesses. So anyway, I'll apply this, and then I think this one took a little bit longer to dry. I don't know why, but this was about 20 minutes for this to dry fully, so I'll skip on ahead. I'm not going to keep you guys waiting 20 minutes, but we'll jump on and be back in just a flash. And welcome back, guys. So now that that's all dried, I'm going back with the Aerial Yellow, and I've thinned it down a little bit, just the same as I did when we went back to the Loren Forest with the green skin. And all I'm doing now is going back over those areas that are a little bit more parallel to the ground, you know, like the tops of the knee, tops of the feet, sort of the vertical pieces, so like the his arm guard, and areas such as that, as well as neatening up some of the areas where the shade has settled in and maybe stained a little bit more than I wanted to, particularly around sort of the bolts that hold the armour together. Obviously I just neaten that up a little bit and sort of blend it into the armour a little bit with the Aerial Yellow. So obviously you can see on the armour here, anywhere that is grey is what I wanted to be black, or obviously another colour. But like I said, all the bolt-on panels, I'm doing the yellow. Now for reference for this, I was using the image from the Games Workshop site. I couldn't find the model if I searched through the site, but going through Google, typing in Orruk Warboss, it would always come up with this model on Google Images. So this was the one that I referenced. The only thing at the end that he's missing is the armour details on his, sort of the black pieces on his arm and his knees. And also on this guy, I decided not to attach some of the trophies that he had, the dangling bones and the other bits. I wanted a little bit more of a plain armour look and just have the one large skull on the side, and obviously I can save those bits for a later date for you know, other models, other projects. So I'll get on with this, and we'll come back in just a bit. Okay, so with the aerial yellow done, I'm now taking some Flash Gitz yellow and a size 1 brush. So obviously I've stepped down from the size 3 that I was using for the majority of the model down to a size 1 now. And all I'm doing with this is picking out all of the sort of the sharp points of the armour. Now this armour has been modelled that it's got very sort of dips and dents and stuff in it, and where those dents come up to a bit of a peak or a point is where I'm applying this Flash Gitz yellow. So obviously you've got the centre part down the knee, and then there's sort of an indentation, 2 indentations next to each other, which will give a little ridge between the two, so I'll pick that off. Things like the feet, you'll get as the feet panels overlap, obviously there's an edge highlight on those areas. The heads of each of the bolts that are holding the armour together, you know, the studs and rivets and stuff, they'll get this. And basically I'm just trying to pick out as much sort of those peaks and raised areas as I can, so that you've then got that aerial yellow and sort of the wash stained areas will be a little bit more indented, just to you know, define that metal a little bit more. Right, and next up I'm taking some Phalanx yellow, and I'm using this essentially to do the same as I did with the Flash Gitz yellow, but focusing more on areas that are going to catch the light more. So obviously anything sort of under his chest or on his back foot near the axe, that's not going to catch the light, but that top part of his left knee, and obviously the area that I'm doing here, the top of his gauntlets and things like that, they're going to catch the light a bit more, so they're going to get edge highlighting with the Phalanx yellow here. Obviously the difference between this and the Flash Gitz yellow is the Flash Gitz yellow was picking out as many ridges and sort of highlight areas as I could. This one is being a little bit more particular and just picking certain areas where I think light would be able to reach and get to, and just highlighting those areas a little bit more. Okay, and for the final highlights, I'm taking a mix of White Scar and the Phalanx yellow, and I'm trying to get quite a pale yellow here, sort of a very whitish yellow, and I'm using this to highlight points where 3 or more areas, sort of ridge lines, come together to form a point. And obviously what I'll do is come away from that point down each of those ridge lines just a little bit, about 1/3 of the length of each line, just to give the effect that that's you know, that light is coming, it's coming to a point and it's really catching that light on there, and obviously that makes it stand out. And then obviously on panel edges where the light is going to catch the most, such as the tops of the arm there, and then some of the more exposed studs and such. And once this area is done, that is the yellow complete. Now, as I said, wasn't my favourite or most enjoyable paint job doing that yellow. That was definitely a little bit horrid, a little bit tedious, but I hope you guys agree that the end result is was definitely worth it. And I am kind of regretting letting my boy have the remainder of the models from that kit, but you know, I'm not going to take them back from him. So yeah, there we go. Maybe I'll get some Space Marines and go with some Imperial Fists or something. But anyway, I'll get on with this and we'll catch you guys for the next stage. Okay, so moving on to the rest of the armour now. I'm taking some Abaddon Black, and obviously being super careful not to get this onto that yellow, because of the process that the yellow went through to get it to its final stage. I really don't want to get black on there, but if I do, then obviously I just have to try and touch it up a little bit. Thankfully it's only a couple of mistakes I make, minor. I managed to keep this pretty well done for the most part, and obviously just touch those little bits up at the end. But for now, all of the remaining panels, armor plates, are going to be black, as well as the axe head, because that's going to obviously be done in a metallic. I find that it's always better to have a black base coat on that. Metallics just show up much better over black than they do over white or grey. He's got a couple of leather pieces on him as well. I start to do them brown and then decide that black would actually be better for them. So if you guys are following along, then the leather, sort of torn leather cloth bits, obviously do them in black as well. But yeah, apart from that, the chainmail armour, all of the remaining panels, the axe head and the little ring at the base of the axe, and then some of those dangly leathery bits, as well as his fingernails. I actually do them black as well. But yeah, there we go. So Abaddon Black over them bits, and that gets us our foundation for building up our blacks. Okay, so now all the black is done and dried, I'm now using one of probably my most favourite paint from the Citadel range, and that is Incubi Darkness. Not only do I like this colour on its own, it works great as a glaze and a wash, especially over silvers. You can get a really nice metallic blue out of it, but I also like it for highlighting black areas and giving those black areas a bit more life to them. Obviously you can't go darker than black, so when doing black you need to go lighter. Obviously you can see the palette cam there froze. Obviously that does pick up again later. For some reason that decided to freeze, and it wasn't until I noticed it that I managed to reset it and get it picking up again. But anyway, yeah, Incubi Darkness I find makes a great highlight, or you know, a mid-tone for black, especially when it's thinned down, so you get some of that black show through. You can really build it up, get it to just shy of being Incubi Darkness, and that works great for sort of a mid-tone for black, and then you can use black as the recess and stuff. So all I'm doing with the Incubi Darkness here is very similar to the Flash Kit's yellow. I'm finding all of those sort of raised areas where you've got the dents and stuff within the armour, and I'm picking them off with this. Obviously it's a little bit thinned down, so it doesn't, you know, it's not too harsh a contrast, and just basically edge highlighting all of the black armour. Okay, so with all the Incubi Darkness done, I'm now taking some Sotek Green. This isn't something that I always use for highlighting black, as obviously it's quite a bright colour. It's a little bit more towards the blue side, and it will give the black a little bit more of a blue tint, because obviously black is in terms of paint and colour is a mixture of colour. Obviously with light it's the absence of light. You know, white is made up of all the colours of light, whereas black is the opposite. With paints and you know, physical colours, it's the opposite. It's made up of a majority of colours to get that dark look. So depending on what colour you use for a highlight, black will always look tinted towards that colour. So if you use blues, your black is going to have a slightly blue look to it. If you use greys and whites, it's going to look a little bit more black, but it's going to look a little bit sort of brighter. If you use reds, then your black is going to appear to have, and bear in mind this isn't the black itself changing, it's just the two colours next to each other, the highlight colour and the black itself will tend to react with each other, and your eyes will give the impression of the black being that highlight colour as its sort of its base colour to make it black. So for this I wanted the armour to have a little bit more of a blue look to it, so obviously I'm going with a Sotek green for those final highlights. If I wanted a bit more of a red look, then obviously I would go with a dark deep red colour, and then a slightly lighter red for highlights. Generally I will go with just adding white into the Incubi Darkness and bring that up, but like I said, I wanted a little bit more of a highlight look to it, so I went with the Sotek green for those edge highlights. And just like I did with the Phalanx yellow, I'm just going around and picking off the studs and rivets and some of those more exposed edges and ridge lines. Okay, and finally, the same as I did with the Phalanx yellow, I have gone ahead and mixed in a little bit of White Scar in with the Sotek green to get obviously a paler sort of blue colour. And again, I'm just using this to pick off points where 3 or more points will meet, and just certain edge highlights, just areas that I want to just pop a little bit more where the light has caught that armour. And obviously I'll go throughout the whole piece and pick off some of those details. Okay, so now that we've got all of the armour finished, I'm now taking some Rhinox hide and getting this onto the sort of the leather trousers that he's wearing. Now I could have done black, but I wanted something to stand out just a little bit different. Now this is the point that I mentioned earlier where the tattered cloth pieces are currently grey, as I was going to do them the same as this, but I decided to do them black. So you can see here I'm just starting to go over, and I think nope, that's going to blend in too much with the trousers, they need to contrast a little bit. We'll do black leather for those. So anyway, all of the underleg here, you know, his trousers are done with the Rhinox hide. Okay, and to highlight some of that that Rhinox hide, I'm just taking some Doomball brown here and just going on the outer edges of the legs, and then just sort of quickly sort of flush it underneath. There's obviously, because it's under the model, there's a lot of shading and shadowing under there, but I didn't want the Rhinox hide to be the main colour. It's a little bit too dark, so yeah, I'm just throwing off the Doomball brown over the top, just to give it a bit of a sort of a warmer tone. Okay, so now that the Orc's armour and skin and clothing is finished, it's time to move on to his weapon. Now you'll notice the 3 pieces that are bolted onto the blade of this I've left out for now, and that's because I will be doing those yellow to match the armour. but for now I'm just going in with some Iron Breaker and just giving this a rough brushing over all of the axe head, and then when I remember I'll do it with the ring at the bottom of the axe as well. At this point I do forget, but the reason I'm doing a rough brushing is I feel it gives a lot more texture to the weapon. Obviously trying to keep the strokes in the same direction, so coming from the blade edge up to the back of the blade, so coming up the blade, and that gives it an almost streaky grazed look to the metal. You know, I'm not trying to leave huge gaps or anything, I'm going over, but because I'm doing it fast you get a little bit of a streakiness to the paint, which is the effect that I'm after with this. Okay, so moving on to the handle of the axe, I'm applying some dryad bark here. Obviously get this down in a couple of coats, and you know, just a nice flat colour on there, and then I can highlight that with some dryad, no, not dryad bark, some Baneblade Brown, which is what you can see me picking up with the brush here. Now I'm using a size 1 brush again, and all I'm doing is trying to pick out those rough edges with the Baneblade Brown here, very lightly. You can see it's almost a tapping motion, just to catch all those edges. What I then do is take off some of the excess paint, as you can see on my thumb there, and just brush over. The paint at this point that I applied has dried, and there's barely any paint on the bristles. This is very similar to dry brushing, and all it's going to do is give a bit of a weathered effect to the handle. And then obviously trying to do the same thing to the inside and underside of the handle as well. Okay, so now to shade the handle and the axe itself, I'm using some Nuln Oil, and as you can see it darkens up that dryad bark and brings out that Baneblade Brown, and it just sort of ties down the dry brushing effect that was on that handle. Obviously over the axe head here I'm letting that pool into the where the blade of the axe becomes the body of the axe. I'm letting it pull down there, and then obviously along the top. So like I said, just getting a nice even coat, let it set into those recesses, those chips and scratches that are on there, and then give it about 10 minutes to dry. Obviously this also goes over the chainmail armour before I forget. So yeah, over the chainmail armour, and then about 10 to 15 minutes to dry, and then I'll be back with you guys in just a bit. Okay, so now that the Nuln Oil has had time to dry, I'm just going back into my starting to dry out Iron Breaker here, and I'm just picking off all those edge highlights, as well as going up the what I call the blade portion of the axe head. So not that flat area, but the more beveled area. What that will do is give it a slightly different shine to the body of the axe. Obviously to start with I'm getting the all the edge highlights in, and then I'll go in and go up that blade edge afterwards. Right, and for the finishing touch for the axe head here, or the final highlight at least, I'm just taking some Stormhost Silver and just sort of touching it along edges where I want some more defined scratches and edge highlights to be. So moving on now to this giant skull that he has on his shoulder. I'm taking some Ushabti bone and obviously I'm going to give this 2 or 3 coats, as that grey is going to show through this a little bit on the first coat. Obviously I'm trying to get this anywhere that is visible. The inside of the skull, not so easy. It's something that maybe I should have painted before gluing this together. In all honesty, I did not think about not being able to get down in there when piecing this together. So if you guys haven't done this yet, I recommend keeping this skull off, as well as the big metal jaw over the front of his face. It'll make getting to his face a lot easier. So yeah, start off with get a nice even coat of this down, or a couple of coats, and then we can get on with shading it. Right, so next up I'm going to take some Zandri dust and use this for the wraps around the axe handle, and also the ones around his arms, so basically anything that's cloth wrap. Also the strings or rope, whatever they are, within the eye sockets of the skull, holding it down to his shoulder plate, those I will also do with the Zandri dust here. And as always, thin paints, 2 to 3 layers, get it nice even coverage on there that doesn't clog up those details. Okay, so to shade the skull and the cloth areas here, I'm taking some Reikland Flesh Shade and applying this all over the skull, obviously making sure that it sets into those recesses. I'll also mention at this point that I have gone in on his face, and with some Ushabti bone I've done his teeth, and with some Screaming Skull I've dotted in his eyes. I didn't want white eyes. I think white is way too bright to use for eyes on miniatures, so I went and got myself some Screaming Skull, and I will now be using that for technically white eyes on my miniatures. So yeah, Reikland Flesh Shade for the skull, and then for the cloth on his arms here, I'm now using some Seraphim Sapphire, as obviously it has a slightly more golden brown tone to it, and again letting that get into all those recesses and gaps, really make that cloth and you know, the rags stand out. And then once that's all done, I'll leave that again for about 20 minutes, and then we can come back. Okay, so with all the shades now dry, I felt that the skull here with the Reikland Flesh Shade had a very natural look to it. So rather than go back over with Ushabti bone, as we would do with some cases of shading and then going back to the base colour to touch up areas, all I'm doing here is taking some Screaming Skull and just highlighting areas, obviously picking out the teeth and then highlighting the you know, the brow, the tops of what I'm assuming would be horns or ears or something, that sort of that back area, the, like you can see here, the bottom of the nose, the nostril, you know, just the little holes, little marks and stuff, like things like that with the Screaming Skull. Just picking out some of those highlights. As I said, the shade settled into those recesses nicely and darkened those up and gave a nice mid-tone to the rest of the skull. So rather than mess that up by going back over, we're just adding some simple highlights, nice and easy. And then I do the exact same thing for the cloth areas. As you can hopefully see, there is a difference between the skull and the cloth. So using this Screaming Skull as a highlight for the cloth just makes it stand out, you know, just right. So yeah, there we go, nice and easy. And I think that is the model for the most part done. So At this point, you could say that he is done and ready to base. However, I wanted to go a little bit more into detail, adding some roughed up areas and such to the model. And so we'll jump to that now, and you can see how I'll apply scratches and dirt and all that stuff to the model. Catch you guys in a bit. Okay, so now that the model is finished, he's looking way too clean for an orc. So I am taking a pretty messed up old brush here that I've kept around for this purpose. The hairs are splayed out and separated, but they're still quite soft. It's because paint has got down into the furrow, which if you don't look after your brushes is going to do this. However, it makes a great stippling brush. So what I've got on the brush here is some iron breaker, and I'm using this on the black parts of the armour. And all this is going to do is give that chipped, worn effect to the armour, you know, scratches and stuff like that. If you do this with barely any paint on the bristles, then you can get some very fine, small dots. Go over an area multiple times and you can get some roughed up areas. Pull the brush across and you can get some very nice fine scratches. Now, I wouldn't recommend using iron breaker on the yellow areas to start with. As I mentioned before, metallics don't go great over light colours. So I've actually got some extra paint on the palette here to do the yellow. So obviously, first of all, I'll go around and scratch up and damage all of the black armour. And then after rinsing the brush and obviously making sure that it's dry, I will do the same to the yellow, but with some Doombull brown. I like the idea of the brown with the yellow. It does make it look like chipped paint, and that the yellow is coming away and giving that sort of brown under armour look. You could probably do this with black and you know, a few other colours, but I find that brown tends to have the best effect on yellow for this. And in very much the same way, just sort of stabbing it on, brushing it anywhere where the armour is going to get scratched. So in particular, any exposed plates, in particular the feet, the toe caps and things like that. They're in contact with ground and gravel and stuff like that, so they're going to get a lot of wear and tear. So you can put quite a lot of this on there. Areas such as the axe head, the 3 yellow blades that are bolted on there, obviously they're going to lose a lot of their paint and chip away, as well as his breastplate and things like that. Obviously, if he gets hit and, you know, things thrown at him, he's going to receive a little bit of damage on there. So the idea is to strategically place it. Think about where that damage is going to be. Don't overdo it. You know, if you think you're doing it too much, stop, because if you think that, then you probably are. With this kind of thing, less is more, and it's important to try and keep those scratches and dots small, even if they're grouped together. Try and keep them relatively small, which is why a brush like this is great for it, as obviously it keeps it within scale of the model. You know, you don't want a big, thick, harsh scratch across a chest piece, as it's going to look too big in scale with the model. Obviously, sometimes that will work. You know, if he was hit by a giant axe or something, it's going to leave a large scratch. But generally speaking, you want to try and keep your textures small. I'm now moving on back onto the iron breaker, and just touching over some of those brown areas where it got a little bit more damage. Some of the brown concentrated a little bit more, so that I could put this over the top. Like I said, it's not going to go great over the yellow, but if you speckle this over the brown, it's almost like you've worn away through the yellow paint, through the primer paint, and then down to the bare metal. Again, keep this to the minimal. You can apply it a little bit more around the feet, as it's going to scratch a lot more, and then like the armour and things like that, obviously if he's defending against blows and such. Okay, so just adding a few extra details to this guy now. The first of which is Typhus Corrosion. Now, I'm not using this to give a rust effect as such, in that I won't be using any Rise of Rust for this. This is to give more of a mud or you know, just general dirt and such down the axe blade. So obviously I just applied that in a few areas where I wanted that to build up. Now you can see here how I am intentionally ruining the bristles on this brush. I'm dabbing it, spraying out or splaying out the bristles in the centre so they form sort of a star shape, and then I will push them back together. And what this is going to do is bend those bristles outwards, and as they form back together they're not going to want to form a point, and they're going to want to splay out a little bit, and that's what makes this brush so great for doing this stippling effect and textures. So if you've got an old brush, or you want to cheat, you know, get hold of a cheap brush, I think I got a pack of these from the Works here in the UK. I think it was like $3.99 for a pack of 9 different size brushes. This is one of them, and I just splayed it out and you know, get a nice effect on there. Right, and finally, what is an orc without some gore and blood on his axe? So I don't have any of the Games Workshop technical paint. Blood for the Blood God, I think it's called. It's the sort of the gunky red one. So all I'm doing here is Khorne Red. Again, with this stippling brush, doesn't matter too much. Just blobbing this onto the blade, removing some of the excess there, and just adding it onto some of the armour. Obviously, you know, you smash somebody with an axe that big, you're going to get blood on you. So a little bit on the armour, not too much. You don't want to overpower it, you don't want to make it look like he's been diving in blood or anything, but you know, just a few splashes and, you know, spots here and there, you know, on the front of the armour, not too much on the back, because he's not killing people behind him, he is smashing them in front. So yeah, nice and easy. This will give the effect of dried on blood. Not as good as the Blood for the Blood God, but it's the next best thing. And then to finish that, a little bit of Wazdakka Red, as you can see here. And all I'm going to do is just on the blade, just a few small bits, again over the top of that Khorne Red. This is a little bit brighter, and this is going to look like there's a little bit more fresh blood on there. The Khorne Red's a little bit darker for dried blood or drying blood, and then this will give the impression of a little bit more of a wet blood on there. So there we have it, guys. All that's left now is to get him based, and we can have a look at the final thing in just a bit. Okay, and here is one finished Orc War Boss. So you can see here I've gone ahead and based him. Now this is just some basic gravel texture that I applied with some PVA and dry brushed with various greys, so that my son can do it with his models. Nothing too complicated, nice and easy for him, so that you can get them, you know, relatively matched up. But that does bring us to the end of today's video. So first of all, thank you ever so much for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit that like button. It helps the channel, it helps with beating YouTube's algorithms and getting the video up on that main page and spotted a lot more, which in turn gets me more views, hopefully more subscribers, and the channel can grow. If you are newly subscribed, thank you ever so much for your support, and if you're not yet subscribed, hit that subscription button for more videos. So until next time, guys, thank you once again, take it easy and keep painting those minis.